Hey everyone, it's Matt here with Nightrun Studio, and we are starting our quest system. Now there are a lot of parts involved in making a quest system with a full quest log and tracking, and we'll get to all of it. However, we're going to break it down into nice bite-sized chunks. So in this first video, we're just going to set up the UI for our quest log. That way in our second video, we can make our quest scriptable objects and start populating the log with data. That's where we're headed in this video, and as we're headed there, we're going to be learning to use some new components. So in this video, we'll look at how the canvas group component works, as well as the grid layout component, the horizontal layout group, and how to use 9 slicing to preserve the edges and avoid stretching in your UI. Now, just a reminder that this series will be building on elements we've added in our other series, so you can check those out if you haven't already. Otherwise, by the end of this video, we'll have a quest log that looks something like this, with individual slots for each quest that includes its name and level. Ultimately, we'll also add a quest description bar here, which we'll be able to animate so that it looks really cool. However, we're gonna save that for just a little bit later. On that note then, let's get started. So the very first thing we're gonna need to do is to create our canvas. I'm just gonna rename this as Quest Canvas, and there's not a lot we need to do here, though let's head into our canvas scaler, where we wanna make sure that rather than constant pixel size, we scale this to the screen size. Now along the way here, we wanna go into our game view and just make sure that our settings here, you'll note I'm using full HD, 1920 by 1080, and we're gonna wanna match that in our canvas scaler. Additionally, I'm just gonna turn off my dialog canvas so that it's not in our way as we work. All right, with that done, we can right click on the quest canvas and actually start adding some images. This first image here is going to be our quest log. If you double click on that, it will zoom us out. I'm gonna just toggle my gizmos briefly here. They can get a little messy. In fact, I'm just gonna take a second to turn off all of my other UI elements here. So if you've been following along, I'm just gonna turn off the UI manager with the skill tree and stat system so that it's not so busy looking. I will leave the inventory and gold in place here though, as I wanna make sure that you can still see those when our quest log opens. Now the sprite that I'll be using here is from the Tiny Swords asset pack. I'm gonna be using Banner Vertical. And here I'm just gonna go to my rect transform, hold down Option, I believe it's Alt on PC, and stretch it in all directions. I am going to be using sliced rather than simple image type here, and I'll be using 0.5 for most of mine, as it's gonna keep it consistent with the other UI elements we've done in the rest of the series. Now, if you have not yet sliced this, you might need to, so we can click on Banner Vertical here. You'll note that I'm using 64 pixels per unit, which is just gonna keep my pixel size consistent. We can then open the sprite editor. Now you'll see I've already sliced mine using these green nodes here, but you can just drag them into place, and anything that is in the outside of this will not get stretched when you enlarge the image, and only the part in the inner square will actually get stretched. It's called 9 slicing because there's actually 9 squares here. You can apply those changes once you're done. Now at this point, I'm just gonna add some custom margins. I've already figured out that I want about 15 on the left, -70 on top, 800 to the right, and then also -70 on the bottom, which just fills this space nicely and leaves us with room for the description later on. Next, we're gonna add our ribbon and title that'll go at the top here. So on the quest log, I'm gonna right click and add another UI image. I'll rename this as Quest Ribbon, and this time around I'll be using the ribbon red 3 slides as our image. Now you notice mine defaulted to simple. That's because I have not yet sliced it. I will change this to sliced and 0.5, but you'll notice that's not actually gonna do anything to the image yet because I haven't prepared it. Now before we slice the image, I'll just give it some size here. I'm gonna move it down to about 360 on the Y, and then set it with a width of 1190 and height of 250. But again, that isn't fitting very nicely, so let's go ahead and slice this. I can click on the image here in the source image and then make sure that it's set to 64 pixels per unit and open up the sprite editor. Now inside here, we can grab these green nodes in order to slice it. You'll notice that I'm cutting out all of the outlining and the shadow here. And actually, I'm gonna do this imperfectly here just to show you a little bit of how the slicing works. So here I'm getting rid of the shadow, so we'll only stretch the innermost part, which will work. However, right now when I get in the game, you'll notice that there actually is a little stretching going in the bottom corners here, because that part was not in the shadow, but it is actually getting stretched, and it's also making it so that this ribbon doesn't fit nicely on the canvas. So to fix this, I'm just gonna drag it in so that that part where the ribbon overlaps on the bottom is completely excluded from the stretch. Now with that done, you'll notice our ribbon now looks much more uniform and actually stretches pretty nicely overall on the canvas. At this point, I'm going to click on the ribbon and just add a UI Text Mesh Pro element. I'll call this one Quest Log Text, and once again, we're going to stretch it in the rect transform here. Don't worry that it looks a little funny for now, we'll set that later. I'm just going to give this a title, something like Quest Log. I'm going to use the Bangers font asset, and I'm going to be using a preset called Bangers SDF material. You should have that, but if for some reason you don't worry, as I'll show you my settings down below. I'm going to set this to a size of 120. We'll give it black for the vertex color. I'm going to center it both horizontally and vertically, though I might just up the bottom margin a little so that it centers a little nicer. With that done, we can come down below where you can see some of the material presets. You'll notice for face, I haven't done anything, but for color, I do have it set to a white outline with a thickness of about 0.3. And then there's also an underlay here. You can see it gives it a nice little bit of a shadow. That's done by using black. You can see my offsets here. And also, if we click on color, you'll notice that it is semi-transparent, which is what gives it that shadowy kind of a look. All right, next up, I can close up the ribbon there, right-click on Quest Log. I'm just gonna add an empty game object. We'll call this one Quest Slots. I'm gonna stretch this one to fill the entire Quest Log area, and then just give it a bit of a boundary. I'm gonna go with 160, 350 on top, 160 on the right, and then 170 from the bottom. Right now you won't really see this doing anything as it's an empty object, but later this will confine where we put all of our slots for the quests. Now here we're gonna add a grid layout group, but I'm not gonna do anything with it yet, as now that there's no slots, you won't be able to see how it's working, so we'll come back to that in just a moment. With that done, we're ready to add our first quest slot. This one will be a UI button. We'll call it Quest Slot. And here we're gonna use the button blue 3 slides this time around. I'm gonna make this one sliced, and I'm gonna deviate this time by keeping it at 1 pixel per unit, simply because this one has a pretty chunky outline and it's a little hard to read the text if I leave it that way, though I admit that this is not quite keeping things uniform, so you can change it if you like. Now that we've created this first slot, we can go back to our grid layout group and set some numbers. So first of all, I'll set each of these to have a cell size of about 750 by 120, and then I'm also going to use upper center as the alignment, which will just put it nicely in the center of the canvas. I'm also going to add a tiny bit of padding just along the top here of about 10, which will just move this down a hair from our title. Now on the quest slot itself, we can rename this thing as Quest Slot Text, give it some text, something like quest name, and then once again I'm going to use bangers. This time I'm going to use a drop shadow material, which again, if you don't have that option, I'll show you my presets below. This time around, I'll use white as my vertex color and set 64 as the font size. I'm going to line this one to the left horizontally and center vertically. Don't worry that it doesn't look great just yet. And once again, you can see my presets with an outline with 0.3 thickness. I also have an underlay here to give it that nice shadowy effect. At this point, I'll just use Command D to make an exact copy of that. And this time around, we're going to call it Quest Level Text. I'm just going to put an 01 there for now. Otherwise, we'll leave things the same. You'll notice that they're overlapping sort of funny. Don't worry. We can head up to the quest slot, and we're going to add a horizontal layout group. This will give us control over the different items and how they display horizontally. Now, you'll notice when I first added that it actually causes chaos. Don't worry, we'll fix that. Now first, I'm just going to add some padding on the left and right. This will just keep our text from overlapping with the outline on the left and right side. Then I'm going to allow this object to control the size of the child. So I'll click width and height there, and you'll notice that that gets things looking a whole lot nicer. The only thing left to do at this point, though, is to click on the quest level text and right align it. That way it'll go all the way to the right side of the box. With that done, I just want to turn this quest slot into a prefab. That way, anytime we make changes to it, it will apply to all other copies of the quest slot. We can do that by heading into our assets folder. I have a folder called prefabs that I'll just drag it into, and it'll turn blue, meaning it's now a prefab. I can then hit Command D to make duplicates of it, and that's looking pretty good. That said, I'm going to head to quest slots and look at our grid layout for a moment. Now, in order to fit a few more slots here, I'm just going to go to spacing and give it a negative value on the Y. You can decide just how squished you want this to look. I think I'm going to go with -20, which has them lined up closely. I'm noticing I can also fit one more slot in here this way, especially if I get rid of that padding on the grid layout top. All right, that's looking pretty good. Now there's one last thing I want to add in this video, and that is a canvas group. So let's go up to our quest log itself, and we're going to add the canvas group component. This will allow us to control the alpha so we can fade it in and out, as well as whether or not this is interactable and whether or not it will block raycast, so keep us from clicking other objects. The nice thing about this is it allows us to control all of the children of this object from one central unit, which is going to be really helpful later on. All right, at this point, I realize we haven't done a whole lot except get set up for the next video. However, in that video, we'll start making our first scriptable objects for quests, and this will allow us to populate each of these slots with a quest that has a name as well as a level. That's where we'll be heading next, and I hope to see you in that video. Until then, this is Matt with Night Run Studio. Cheers.